So thank you very much. Yeah, let me just say, um, the cardiovascular system is just that's the circulatory system. It's just another system entirely that takes part in what the body what homeostasis. And the human heart, as I mentioned earlier, consists of what two atrias and what two ventricles. The atrias are having what thinned wall and they can receive what they receive the blood from the major veins. And what are the major veins? We have what the vena cava and the pulmonary what the pulmonary vein, and allows it to what fill into what the ventricles downward. So it's telling us that it's the blood actually what comes down from what the atrias. So and the ventricles, which are what having what a thick wall, they pump blood into what pulmonary and what systemic circulation. Sorry, as we're having the first part, which is actually what our right ventricles actually pumps blood into the what into our lungs. We stand for what oxygenation. Then the other side, that's actually our what left ventricles actually what pump out blood into what systemic what circulation. So why? Okay, the thing is, okay, why? Okay, my blood leaving the what right ventricles to the lung for oxygenation. So it's telling us that okay, immediately the blood has actually leave the heart from the left ventricle. It's actually an oxygenated blood, but immediately it gets to tissues, the tissues what utilize the oxygen, so it makes it what the oxygenated blood. So getting back to the heart, it needs to be what oxidized again. So the next thing is that our blood will be what transferred from what through our what pulmonary what artery into our lungs. Are you with me? And we're having two of those arteries. One enters into the what the right lungs and the other one into the what the left lungs. Not like that of what the pulmonary vein, where we're having what four branches of the vein. So from there I would like to talk about the valves involved again. So we're having what four valves. We're having what two atrioventricular valves, and we're having what the two what semilunar valves. So what are the what atrioventricular valves? From the word atrium and ventricle. So the valve is actually what situated in between the what the atrium and the what the ventricles we mentioned earlier. So we're having the right atrioventricular valve, and we're having what the left atrioventricular valve. The right atrioventricular valve is the same thing as what tricuspid valve, and that of our what atrioventricular valve is the same thing as our what bicuspid valve, which some call it what the mitral valve. So going to the other one, which is actually the semilunar valve. That's what aortic valve and the pulmonary valve. What is the function of these valves? That's the next thing. The main function of the valve is actually what to prevent what the regurgitation, the backflow of blood from where it's coming from where it goes back to where it came from. So the main function of the valve is actually to what prevent what regurgitation. So now moving to the what properties of what cardiac muscles. The properties of cardiac muscles, it actually consists of what it consists of two type of what muscle fibers, and the first one is actually um the cardiac muscle proper, and the conducting system. So those are actually the main types of the muscle fibers. So moving down, I'd like to talk about the main source of energy for the heart. So the cardiac muscles consume fats as the main source of of energy. Under basal condition, 60% of the calorie needs are provided by free fatty acid. About 35% are being produced by carbohydrate, and about 5% are actually being produced by the ketones and the amino acids. So from there, I'll move towards blood supply. The cardiac muscle receive its blood supply mainly through, let me say, okay, during the diastole. Unlike skeletal muscles, which receive its blood during the systole, the left ventricles receive its blood supply only during diastole, while the right ventricle receive its blood supply in both the systole and and diastole. So moving there, let's talk about what the great vessels. The great vessels, this is actually what the vessels are actually what attached to the head directly. We having the aorta, we having what the pulmonary what artery, we having the what pulmonary vein, and we having what the vena cava. We having what our vena cava is been divided into two. We having what inferior, what the inferior and what and the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava actually was drains blood from the what? From the head, neck, and the what? Upper limb. Let me call it the trunk and the upper limb. While the what? Inferior vena cava drains the blood from the remaining part of the body back into the heart. So it's telling us that our vena cava is actually what? A what? uh, a vessel that actually what returns blood back into the heart. So definitely, it's actually what brings blood directly into the what the right atrium. So the blood entering into the right atrium, it's actually what's going to descend downward into the what the right what ventricle. And remember, the blood that actually comes in are what are blood that has been used by the what the organs. So most of it are actually what we categorize it as what deoxygenated blood. So the next thing is actually for it to what get oxygenated. So it's going to what leave the heart again through the what right ventricle, through the vessels. And what's the name of the vessels? And that's our what pulmonary what artery. So moving outside through the pulmonary artery, it's actually going to enter the lungs, and from our lungs it's going to get oxygenated and returns back through the pulmonary what vein. So coming into the pulmonary vein is going to enter the left atrium. It descends downward again into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle we having what our aorta actually what attached to it. And at the level of the aorta, let me call it, is actually what a vessel that actually brings about what the circulates the blood to all other what arteries. I call it the father of all arteries. It's actually an artery, and it's also what supplies other arteries. Ahead itself, it's also been divided to we having what we're having the ascending aorta, and we're having what the descending aorta. Though it's unlike that of what the vena cava, where we're having what do these two distinct what separate vessels. No, it's just like it's actually where we're having it leaving the heart going upward. That's the what that's the ascending aorta. It forms an arc and descend downward. So where it's okay at the level of the hack, we having what three what other what arteries there, and those arteries actually supplies the what the hand and the trunk, that's the head and the neck. And the descending part of the aorta actually what supplies all other part of the body apart from the trunk and the upper limb. So the third thing I'll be talking about is actually what the heart itself. The heart itself actually it's having a different what blood actually what's keeping it functioning. Remember, when we see something is actually pumping organ, like our what? Let me give example of what our pumping machine. Our pumping machine, the function of our pumping machine to pump into our thorax, but I guess it actually needs something like a form of energy to actually keep it what active, and that's might probably be what electricity. So same applies to the heart. Apart from it's actually what pumping blood out, so it needs something to what it actually needs blood to nourish itself also, with the nutrients it needs, oxygen it needs, hormones it needs. As we know, our heart also what produce hormones. It perform different functions. So one of the function of our heart is actually what okay transportation of what oxygen, transportation of what nutrients, transportation of what hormones, transportation of what different fluids and heat. So when I mean different fluids in it, we should remember that our heart is not just it's not just transporting what red blood cell. We have another component of what the blood, which comprises us. We'll be talking about what the erythrocyte, we'll be talking about the leukocyte, we'll be talking about the lymphocyte, we'll be talking about what the plasma itself. So from there, I guess I was actually talking about um the main source of energy for the heart before I actually want to digress. So from there, I'm going to move to um Okay, yeah, pulmonary circulation. So pulmonary circulation, this is circulation between the what, the heart and the lungs. And I already gave us their what, the artery involved, and that's what the pulmonary was artery, and it's actually being, the blood is actually being returned back to the heart through the what, pulmonary vein. And there's actually what a tactics you might actually be like, why is actually an artery carrying deoxygenated blood? We say something probably in the secondary school days. We'll say, okay, all arteries carries what, oxygenated blood, except what, pulmonary what, artery that carries what, deoxygenated blood, and all veins carries what, deoxygenated blood, except what, except the pulmonary vein that actually carries what, oxygenated blood. So from there, that has actually been explained, and I already told us the heart is actually divided into four chambers: the right and the left atrium, and the right and the left what, ventricles. So moving down there, I'm going to move to the structures of the arteries. The structures of the artery is actually what's it's actually composed of the what, we having the what, the tunica intima, we having the tunica media, and we having the what, so tunica adventitia. You say something like tunica intima, from the word intima means what, friend, something what, intimate, something actually close to something. So tunica is intima, is actually the what, the layer of what, of the artery that is actually what's closer to the blood. I do explain like that. Then we're having what, tunica media, from the word media, we should know it's actually what's medium, or let me say it's actually what's middle. So when you say something is middle, it's not too high, it's not what, too low, it's actually what, on the fence. So yeah, I'm going to tunica media is actually what, the middle layer of what, of the arteries, and tunica what, adventitia, to say advert, let's see, I, before I can actually be called, okay, okay, let's say for example, I'm actually wearing a clothes here. Say yes, you're using this clothes as a form of what, as a form of what, advertisement. So it's actually telling us something outside that is actually what's actually visible for others. So immediately I say I dissect your hand. I'm looking at your what, arteries, I'm looking at your vein. The first part I'll be looking at is actually what, the tunica what, adventitia, followed by what, the tunica what, media, and the last part with the innermost part, and that's what, the tunica what, the tunica intima. So from there, I'll move to the function of the blood. Okay, the function of the blood vessels. So the first one is that it provide what, passage or pathway for blood and its contents. As normally without vessels, how's our blood going to move? What move? It's not possible for our blood to move if there's no vessels. So the next one is that it makes what, metabolism to take place by breaking down of food substances. It's actually because I'm having what, these blood vessels actually what supplies each what organs with what they need for them to function. If I'm not having what these vessels, there will be what difficulty in what, in the discharge of what, blood from my heart, so all other part of what, of the body. And the third function I'm having here is actually that it helps in what, regulating what, blood flow. The next one is that it helps in what, the elimination of what, waste products from body tissues, as we have what, the elimination of waste products through the what, through what, pulmonary circulation into the lungs, as we have what, the exchange of what, substances between the what, the vessels, and the what, the tissues, that's probably at the levels of the what, the capillaries. So the last function I'm having here is that it's arteries leading to the contents, that is to the what, internal organs, a parental and what, visceral branches of the what, descending what, aorta. So the next thing here is actually talking about what, the vessels involved. You can actually check that inside the handout and read properly. So now moving to the what, the veins, which is actually what, probably we call it what, which carries what, deoxygenated blood or impure blood. The veins carries blood from the organ to the heart in a direction opposite to the what, to the flow of what, arteries. So when we say direction opposite to the flow of arteries, our arteries actually supplies what, good blood. I use just for us to understand. So then how what, veins carries what, the used blood. That's now it's no more what's good for us. It might, or let me say toxic. It might actually what, be toxic to our health. So from there, I will be talking about um from now, I will be talking about what, the erythrocyte. So what do I mean by the erythrocyte? The erythrocyte is the same thing as what, what red blood cell, popularly known as red blood cell. So our erythrocyte is actually also being produced by what? It's actually being produced by our bone marrow. It's actually being produced by our livers when we're young, and actually when we are old has like this. Because when we have been told that okay, my our bone actually produce blood, remember that we are having what neonates whose bone are not actually what strong enough to produce what maximum blood in it. So we're having what we're having the what deliverance from what other what visceral organs that actually what helps in the production of what blood. So I'm telling you now that it's not just your what bone marrow that helps in the what in blood production. So we're having one of the blood actually being produced there is actually what our erythrocyte. Erythrocyte is actually what one of the what most popularly known what red blood cell, because I guess it's actually what performs different functions, and I get it's actually we see something red blood cell. Have you ever seen a red white? Actually, red blood cell is not the one really the one that actually what gives our what our cell its color, but it's actually because it's also been present there. What gives our blood its color is actually because of the presence of what the hemoglobin. A hemoglobin gives our what blood what its red coloration. So it's actually our hemoglobin that actually what react to that oxygen. We say it, yes, our blood is going for what oxygenation in the lungs, where we having what our oxygen what's reacting with our what hemoglobin to give us what oxyl hemoglobin. So from there, move to what? Okay, the what lifespan of what erythrocytes is actually about 120 days. Please note what I said about. I never said 120 days, but about 120 days. We're having different factors that might actually bring about what the breaking down of what, or let me say, reduction in the what lifespan of what of the erythrocytes, probably the size increase. When we're having macrocytes, there's actually tendency for it to what get destroyed before 120 days, and also when we're having what microcytes, that's small cells. And apart from that, sickle cells also can, the lifespan in that what red blood cell is actually what reduced and what's normal. Now let's move to what our white blood function of our white blood cell. The span of our white blood cell is actually what's reduced, and that of our what uh red blood cell. And we having what the volume, or let me say the amount of our red blood cell is higher than that of our white blood cell. So what's the function of our white blood cell? The main function of our white blood cell is actually to protect us against what invaders. So what do I mean by invaders? It might actually be what pathogenic invaders. It might be what it might really just be like body what disorders. So it is so our white blood cell, the main function of our white blood cell is actually what to what fight diseases, to protect the body. So though we are having what different cells of what our white blood cell, that's what we're talking about. B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and as I guess, okay, we do okay our thymus actually what performs the function for what and what protection. But we should know that is actually what a cell being one example of what a cell, a white blood cell that is being moved what to thymus to perform the function of what of protection, and it's actually one what the lymphocytes. So we're having the lymphocytes, we're having the macrophage. So these are what types of what white blood cell. The macrophage works phagocytose what bacteria, or let me say invaders. So I'm moving to the what the third part, which is actually the what the platelet. The platelets, or let me call it what the thrombocyte. Some leukocyte and granulocyte develops from the seeds known as what the myelast. So they are known to have the power of what coagulation. So when you say yes, what's the function of our what our platelet is actually what the main function is actually what it helps in what blood coagulation. What do I mean by blood coagulation? The ability for your blood what to clot when we have what probably tissue what rupture, or tissue ruptures, or let me say blood vessels what ruptures. So it's actually function of what uh platelet what clot our blood, so that we will not what lose as much blood as it might actually what be dangerous to our hearts. So the last part is actually the what um the plasma. Yes. And okay, the plasma. So what's the function of the plasma? It's actually the function of the plasma. It actually helps us in what? The first one, or let me say the main, is actually what? The identification of what? Your what? Blood groups, because it's having your what? Antigens present in it. So moving from there, I'm going to what? Brief about what? The blood types we're having blood type A, we're having blood type B, we're having blood type AB, and we're having what? Blood type O. I will not be chance to talk about what the antigens and antibodies. So I'm going to move to protein circulation. Okay, systemic circulation first. So systemic circulation commences after what? After when we're having what? Our oxygenated blood enters into our heart through the what? The pulmonary what? The pulmonary vein, and leaving here through the what? The aorta. So immediately it leaves the aorta, it's actually what? Entering into what? It's entering into the what? The systemic circulation. So from there, we're talking about the portal circulation. In the portal circulation, venous oxygenated blood and blood nutrient passes from capillaries bed of the what abdominal part of the digestive system. That's talking about the spleen, the pancreas, to the what? To the liver. And it passes through the what? The second capillaries. It passes through the what? The second capillaries are moving into the what? The liver before entering into the what? General circulation through the what? Through the inferior what? Vena cava. So next, I'm going to talk about what I am just going to brief about what the conductive system of the heart. So the first one is like that what one of the words property of our heart. We're talking about the properties. We're talking about what the contractility, conductivity. So now we're talking about what the conductive what system. So we're talking about the conductive system. We're having what five main what systems, or let me say five main what uh, five main probably fibers or muscles that actually what brings about what heart what conductivity. So the first one is actually the what we're having the what the SA node, we're having the AV node, we're having the internodal atrial pathway, we're having the what the bundle of East, and we're having what the two branches of the what Purkinje fibers. So next I'll be talking about what again. I would advise you to read more about what ECG and also what cardiac output. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time you gave me.